Moving swiftly on, we don't spoil you with too many tea breaks, do we? All those lovely cakes and goodies out there. But those of you still watching online, I'm sorry about the absence of refreshments, but for those of us in New York, in half an hour we have a little reception that will start, so please stay for that. And we have a guest as well during that, but there'll be plenty of time for socializing and networking. Listen, I introduced myself earlier. I'm John Morrison. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights in Business, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all. It's been an amazing day. I think the Global Forum's come a long way. The caliber of the conversations, the integrity through which each person comes forward, and I think we really get to the complexity. I don't think anybody feels that we've made as much progress as we hoped to over the past 6 years, but I think we know what the issues are now, and small amounts of progress. And it's with that I am very happy to be with Mahmoud Qutub, who is the Executive Director for Worker Welfare and Labour Rights for the Supreme Committee for the Delivery and Legacy of the Qatar 2022 World Cup. Now that's soccer for any Americans in the room. You're not allowed to pick the ball up, you kick it. And actually it's pretty popular in most parts of the world. And actually the American teams, your women's team's very good, by the way. I'm very pleased that the former goalkeeper of your team is now our executive director of our Center for Sport and Human Rights, Mary Harvey, and a nod to her and all her colleagues. Now, for us at IHRB, we started working on this issue around the time of the London Olympics. My colleague Neil, who you know, led a campaign called the Staff Wanted campaign, focused on the 5,000 hotels in London. And we worked with Anti-Slavery International and the Metropolitan Police to really highlight the issue of worker exploitation in the hotel industry in London. And that was the beginnings of a journey for us. Back then, human rights wasn't in the bidding criteria for mega sporting events. And you were awarded the Qatar Cup really early. It was 2010, is that right?
That's right.
And let's be honest, worker welfare wasn't part of the bid, right? And we'll come on to that. Mahmoud, you were part of the bid committee in 2009.
That's right.
And then the Supreme Committee itself was founded in 2011 after it was awarded. Just say a little bit about that transition between the bid committee and then the Supreme Committee for Delivery. Were they the same people? Or?
Yeah, more or less. I was part of the original bid team, joined in July 2009. And yes, we had a couple of options really. We could either fold and then come back 3-4 years before the tournament, which is very customary, or we can use that opportunity to really build the state and the infrastructure required and making sure that there is a system around legacy that will have lasting effect for Qatar and the region. So I think we took a decision to say, look, we have an opportunity with the number of years, over a decade effectively, I think it was, to be able to actually work together as a unit, expand, build, and then focus a lot on legacy. That was really a key pivotal point in our decision. So
if we go back in time, if it wasn't part of your bid to host the World Cup, worker welfare and responsible recruitment, when did it come into focus for you? Can you remember the day or the week? So again, I think under the auspices of social human development, there is a chapter in the bid book. I co-authored that with a colleague of mine, and a lot of it was focused on underprivileged communities throughout, not just in Qatar, but also throughout the region. And we developed various programs. One of the programs that I designed was Generation Amazing, which was using football as a social development tool to help underprivileged youth throughout the region. We went to Syria, we went to Lebanon, refugee camps, went to Nepal. I personally went to Nepal, Pakistan as well. So that was really a taste for FIFA that there is hope from this World Cup around legacy from a social standpoint. That was really pivotal. That was really the reason I stuck around, frankly speaking. Which year is this?
This was 2009, 2009-10, as we were preparing the actual bid book.
Right.
That was the fundamental reason why I joined, and that was the reason why I stayed. It was really the legacy from this World Cup. It wasn't really about the 30 days of football, for me personally at least. And Hassan, our Secretary General, really sold me on that. And he was genuine. He believed in it. He was committed to it. And I wanted to be part of it. It was quite historic. Workers' welfare came, or discussion around the challenge of workers' welfare came when we were developing our first 3-year strategy, which I led that effort. This was our 3-year strategic plan. And coupled with that was a legacy framework, a very comprehensive document that really explored how we can leverage on the World Cup to really expand on the QNV 2030. That's the Qatar National Vision 2030, which is built off of 4 pillars: economic development, social and human development, economic diversification, and environmental sustainability. And so, so we really built it on that, on the premise that we can be used as an accelerator of the QNV 2030 vision and the National Development Strategy goals. So you'll find it in our strategic plan as well as our legacy framework around 2011, 2012.
Now, I'm right in thinking that worker fees are illegal under Qatari law.
Correct.
But I mean, a lot of attention was turned to the kafala system that was and to some extent still is prevalent in Gulf countries, where the state essentially privatizes the recruitment system and families have quotas, etc. When did you really come to a realization that this was going to be a big risk, a big problem for you to manage?
It was shortly after we won the bid. Well, I mean, one of the probably the most key major steps we took after winning was what we call the exploratory phase, which was really a brainstorming, I'd say over probably a good year to 2 years, where we engaged with civil society, non-governmental organizations, public, private sector, companies, the government, to try to understand what is working and what is not working. I mean, I think we recognize that we're building stadiums. So we needed to have systems in place. Now, the question for us was, do we adopt the Qatar labor law, which existed? It was sound at the time, there's no doubt about that. Implementation or enforcement is obviously another issue, but as a law, it was solid, but there were gaps. And I think fundamentally for us, as we were engaged with civil society and all of them, and you name them, they were involved in this process, we found an opportunity to really create a robust monitoring and enforcement system. And that's where I think our system is quite unique. So I think fundamentally the standards that we rolled out in 2014, this was a key turning point in the labor rights landscape of Qatar for us as an organization to have these standards. And the standards were governed, and the operational element is through the 4-tier auditing system that really has become effectively the backbone of our standards and our system over the years, really.
Now, I think the first time we first met, I can't remember when it was exactly, but it's probably about 6, 7, 8
years. It was a while ago.
It was a while ago. And I guess there was, we were like cats,
Yeah.
you know, sort of, going around the room like this, circling. And it was the time that Sharon Barrow was General Secretary of the ITUC. Right. She called Qatar a slave state, I believe. That I remember her saying that. And there really was a lot of distrust, I would say. How well received, I mean, trade unions are not allowed to organize in Qatar, but you did it, you made it possible for BWI to do inspections. Yeah. How did you create space for civil society and trade unions within Qatar, where then that's not traditionally part of the way things are done there?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Why is it important? Why did you think it was important?
It's essential. I mean, I say this to others that ask us for advice now. When you look at the region and the global landscape, what did you do right, what did you not do right, and so on. But I think collaboration from the beginning, I think it was really the essence of our program. Transparency through our public reporting, but collaboration with key stakeholders, partners, has been absolutely essential. I think we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that the success we've achieved, despite the challenges that existed, I think is really, collaboration is at the heart. BWI, as you mentioned, John, they played a key role. Can you imagine for a minute at that time having again, it's Qatar, trade unions, as you mentioned, they can't operate. And for us to actually engage in a collaboration and sign an MOU with the biggest construction trade union in the world, to give them access effectively, right? I mean, they had open access to all of our stadiums. They could meet with the workers, they can find out what's good, what's not, what's working, what's not, and so on, and help us effectively improve on those conditions. I mean, it's really quite historic, I think, at the time, and this was in 2016 that we signed the collaboration. Me and the late Jin Suk Lee were co-chair. She was my co-chair in this particular group, and it was a joint working group made up of both SC members of the SC organization, as well as trade unions from BWI's affiliates all over the world. And we've published annual reports since, really sort of sharing what has worked, what hasn't worked, and all those challenges. I think that element of transparency, the openness to criticism, which has been really a key cornerstone of our program, I think this is something we've been true to it. We believe in it wholeheartedly. I think it's absolutely valuable for a lot of organizations, regardless whether it's governments that are building infrastructure projects, mega infrastructure projects, or multinationals. I think you need to be able to operate outside of your comfort zone. Get those in to give you an independent review of what's really working, what's not working.
I mean, you mentioned Jin Suk, who I think many of us miss, and
Yes,
it's quite sad to look back. And also Professor John Ruggie, who
Yes.
authored the UN Guiding Principles, who did that report for FIFA back in 2015, 2016, that maybe didn't set the roadmap for you, but has certainly set the roadmap for FIFA events subsequent. Tell me a bit about how, once you'd identified responsible recruitment as a salient issue for you, how, and I believe there were about 30,000 construction workers
At peak.
At peak.
That's right.
How did what were the key issues that you identified, and how did you prioritize which ones to address?
Right. So I think first and foremost, John, knowledge is important. I think one has to really understand the crux of the issue fundamentally, right? We talk about it, but how much of it do we really know? Have we spoken? Have we engaged with workers to understand exactly what they've went through to get a better life for themselves and their families overseas? And I think part of because of our system and our auditing system, which as I mentioned, it's four-tiered. One is the contractors are obligated to audit themselves and their supply chain. This is mandatory per our compliance, per our workers' welfare standards. And they're held liable if they do not, by the way. There's penalties associated with that. Then we would go in as the Supreme Committee and we carry out 100% audit of the supply chain. On a quarterly basis, just to give you some context, we've put in about 150,000 hours of audits and inspections since 2016. Quite extensive. We have legs on the ground day in, day out. And then you have Impact, our external monitor. We've had a lovely relationship with Rosie. She's been tremendous, her and her team, healthy tension. And again, in her, it is a healthy tension, no doubt. I mean, I love Rosie to death. And really, and it's been a tremendous collaboration. That's another element of a collaboration, as I believe is pivotal, is having that external monitor with you as part of your due diligence program. So they would come in, of course, and they would do ad hoc randomized audits. They can't really do as much as we do, but they go in, there's a deep dive that they were able to do. Throughout that process, John, we're able to really discover the issues of recruitment fees. It doesn't really take much to realize through the audit, but more importantly, through the workers' experience and the engagement that we have with workers through the interview process. We spend a lot of time speaking to workers, eating with them, spending time trying to understand the challenges, what they face. Then that issue really comes to the surface and you realize how significant it is.
Is it the most important issue?
It's one of the most important
Right.
issues. Because
what are the others?
Look, living conditions were obviously very important. When we set out on this journey in I would say probably 2014, before we started construction, accommodations in Qatar needed some improvement. And our standards has a huge emphasis on decent living conditions. They're very specific, what we're expecting from companies. And it includes much more than just room and board. We're talking about access to a gym, access to Wi-Fi, green space, recreational space. It's very, very stringent. And we audit and inspect, and companies are held liable for that. That was really a major challenge in the early days. And you can imagine, a worker goes out every day, is tired, wants to come back home, speak to their families overseas. They want Wi-Fi access to be able to communicate. So we wanted to do that, give them a home away from home. The issue of pay will always be fundamental. Wage theft exists. It exists in every country around the world. Our systems are there, and of course, during the time that we were running our program, the WPS was instituted in Qatar, the Wage Protection System.
Yeah.
It still required some work and some auditing and inspections and improvement. I know the ILO was very much focused on that with the government, and it's come a long way. But certainly recruitment fees and the payment of recruitment fees, the fact that they've been in debt bondage, and I heard this morning, in the case of Bangladesh, they were spent over 3 years just to repay that. This is real.
Yeah.
I mean, when you speak to the workers, you realize how significant it is.
So of your 30,000 workers at peak, how many of them had pay fees? What percentage?
The majority. Let's be honest, the majority. I mean, I think what we have found, though, for example, in some of the African states, is that the workers would have paid certain costs.
Right.
What is recruitment fees? There's several figures that go into that,
Right.
really, right? And I think what we've seen in some of the
sending countries or receiving in Qatar or before?
Before they even
budget?
set foot, before they step on a plane, they would be in debt bondage. We've seen in some of the African states where they would have paid for health examination before deploying. That's, again, it's illegal. And so we rectify that, we step in. But by and large, it's a significant problem. It does affect most of the workers out of Nepal, Bangladesh.
And can you give a sense of the range, like the small, the smallest to the largest per migration corridor? Did you get a?
We've seen Bangladesh to be the highest paid.
And how much?
Anywhere between, I mean, you have experts here. I know Andy's in the room and he probably knows this better than I do, but I think it's quite significant, Bangladesh. I mean, I think we've seen cases upwards of $3,500 in some cases. So, and we've looked at averages, and I think what we did is really look at the ILO benchmark in terms of what is the full cost of recruitment. We also retained the services, commissioned, is a better word, for an expert, a very renowned expert at Hamad bin Khalifa University, to do both a remittance study for us as well as a recruitment fee study.
Right.
And both of those, I think, helped us fully understand the challenge. And only then were we able to actually start thinking about taking meaningful steps, despite the fact that we were told, this is too complex, don't get involved, leave it to governments.
So I think what's kind of famous about your approach is you put the onus of proof on the employer and not on the worker, right?
Correct.
So you assumed the workers had paid the fees unless the employer could prove otherwise.
Correct.
Which is quite radical, right? I mean, I don't think many businesses in this room take that approach to the way they deal with this issue. When did you decide that you would take that approach?
I think once we realized there is a significant problem, and again, money back in the pockets of workers means something. Prevention is always better than, obviously, remediation is important, but you really want to work towards prevention, and there's no doubt this is something that all of us believe in that. I think in early 2017, John, one of the things, there were twofold, actually, two steps that were taken. One was managing the supply chain. That was key. Understanding exactly who's on your site, not just main contractors, I mean the tier 2s and the tier 3s at the time, which we had. We actually worked through that supply chain management strategy to eliminate even the tier 3s, right, over the years, which was significant, by the way.
You mandated that? You
Yes.
said no tier 3?
Well, no, we didn't mandate. By having access to those firms meant that we can actually institute certain systems or requirements on the main contractors to audit and inspect, otherwise they will be penalized.
Right.
From their perspective, they want the easy way out. So it was easy to say, get rid of tier 3s, let's minimize the effort that we have to do. It was really, we went from a model of about 55% main contractors, the rest on tier 2s, so then the main contractor,
Right.
the sort of pendulum shifted. So 2017, supply chain management, we had access to every subcontractor before they deploy, so we could vet them basically. We had to give the green light for the subcontractors to be deployed. That was a major step in us as workers' welfare, that is, managing the supply chain. And the second step, as you mentioned, John, was really putting the onus or the burden of proof on the employer, not the employee. We stopped asking the employees, frankly speaking. I mean, it was really bound to the employer.
You didn't try and evidence what the employees were saying. You just took it as...
You're effectively guilty until you
Right.
prove to me you're innocent.
Right.
Right, and you have to disclose.
Yeah.
And this is how the process, or at least the negotiation began in early 2017. And of course, the process took months of negotiation, of conversation with them, to try to educate them, to raise their awareness. There is an element, often, we seem to think that businesses are just corrupt and they're just basically out to make a buck at the expense of the workers. But there is ignorance, right, in the supply chain. This is quite evident, by the way. And what you find, particularly in my role, when I'm sitting with MDs, managing directors, or C-level, they really have no idea. They genuinely don't have any idea of what it takes to actually hire and the process of hiring and the recruitment. So for us, we took it as an opportunity to educate, raise awareness, and then break the news to them that you're going to have to cough up.
And how did they react? They were delighted when you told them that.
They were, there was a lot of jaws dropped in the room. I mean, there was a shock. I have to admit, there was a shock. From a lot
Did
of
any try legal action or breach of contract?
They did
or-
not. They did
Did you have a contractual basis to do this?
We had a contractual basis not to deploy them on the site, yes. We could have prevented them from deploying.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that they're in violation of the standards. And the standards it was very clear in the
Okay.
standards. And the law is very clear that you cannot charge workers any recruitment fees.
And how
right?
did the Qatari government react to you enforcing the law?
I mean, Qatari government was very supportive. I mean, I think they've fully understood what we've done and the process that we've undertaken. The companies, more importantly, John, I think this was a collaborative notion. I mean, there's a notion that perhaps we actually imposed this strategy on them. It wasn't the truth at all. They actually signed up for this. They understood the value of doing this. They wanted to right the wrong, and they committed to doing it. And I think we didn't want to put them out of business. So, and often you'd hear in the construction sector, we're basically, our margins are very thin. We're losing money, which I never really understood, and I still don't understand it. Why are you in this business if you're losing money? But anyway,
They always say that.
The construction sector is a rough sector. I think many of you must have heard about this. But I think we've tried to alleviate that risk by effectively putting them on a payment plan, right?
All right.
2 years, 3 years to repay that loan
Okay.
to the workers.
So it was material to them, these amounts of money?
Yeah.
And did any of them have evidence that the workers hadn't paid? Were any of them able to meet your challenge and say, here we are, we've documented?
No.
There wasn't a single one that said, here we go.
No.
No. So everyone had to pay in effect.
They may have had an element of what it costs, whether it's a health examination or whether government fees, but as a full cost of recruitment, no, they were not unable to do so. In fact, some of them thought that by hiring a recruitment agency, which costs roughly $200, by the way, that they did their job. No, we actually did ethical, we committed to an ethical recruitment process. We have an agent. Okay, was the agent licensed? That's another trait. And in many cases, there were unlicensed agents that we had to
And it was the contractors you were charging, not the second tier,
correct.
the employers, not the recruiters. How many of them were able to get the money back off second tier or
Well,
recruiters?
to be fair, just to clarify the point, if there is within the contracts between the employers and the brokers or the recruitment agents clauses regarding ethical recruitment, then they can get them on breach of contract, and this has happened by the way.
That has happened. Okay. Well, the World Cup's over. England didn't win.
My apologies.
Unfortunately.
What can I say?
Yeah.
The US didn't win.
There's always next time, but you're still in a job, right? So that's great. You're delivering a World Cup and it's finished. So I want that kind of job. So this is the legacy part of your mandate. So what does that mean in essence? Why are you still being paid to do? What do you do?
This is a question from my boss, who's not here.
Hassan.
Hassan. Well, I mean, again, 13 years. You can imagine you can't just simply pack up in a month or two. It takes time. Look, I think we're very focused on the next phase. And the next phase for us is really a lot of the work of transitioning. One of the again, an important point to mention is we moved from the construction sector audits and inspections, John, to the hospitality sector.
Yeah.
This was the first time in a global context where the hospitality sector audited and inspected. And if you recall, in Paris in 2018, we met with the ILO and the Ministry of Labor and FIFA and discussed this opportunity and the challenge before us. And we, as a team at the Supreme Committee, really stepped up to the challenge. I mean, we did a pilot with 5 hotels, and then we went on to audit about 150 plus hotels that were hosting fans and the football teams. And that's a major legacy. I think we're very proud of that effort only because of the commitment that the hotels have made, the seriousness of which they've improved their operations. What we've done since we won the World Cup is we didn't want to just fold and disappear. So we went back to those hotels, and we've done about 100 or so hotels since the World Cup to see how genuine was this effort. Was it just for the World Cup? Were they committed to it? And we were pleasantly surprised. Most of the hotels maintained the average improvement of a compliance score. And it's roughly about 15%.
The standards are not dropping now that the World Cup's over and everyone's looking somewhere
Certainly
else.
not in the hospitality sector.
Okay.
So far it's been very, very positive. I'm very
Okay.
optimistic about that.
Now, the GCC is alive with projects now, massive mega projects, sports, infrastructure in the deserts. To what extent are you able to get others to replicate what you've done?
We started having informal discussions with the neighbors to try to really promote our model. Our model is unique in the sense that it can be applied to both governments, mega projects, the private sector, and we've had conversations with multinationals about our model. And there have been multinationals that have adopted our model in some of their factories, by the way, when it comes to recruitment fees, that is. So our standards are very relevant to many organizations. Our transparency, our cooperation with civil society has been also of interest to many operators, as you can imagine.
They think you were crazy, did they?
Yeah, they think they thought we're crazy. They no longer think that. I think they've seen that there is a way to work with civil society in a meaningful way for the benefit of workers, fundamentally. And I think, and they are exploring that. And so they're coming to us, asking us about our advice and guidance. Look, we're very interested, there's no doubt. I mean, exporting this is what, from the beginning, I think, talking about the legacy, we've never really shied away from being honest about this is not just for Qatar, but also the wider region. You would have heard me say it. Certainly, Hassan Al-Thawadi has said it repeatedly, and we were genuine about this. And so anything that we can do to promote to work with Saudi, having a mega infrastructure boom that is happening currently, you can imagine the challenges before them, UAE, but also other markets, right? I mean, Malaysia, we were discussing Malaysia earlier, and other markets. I think there is definitely value, and not the least of which, of course, is the US with 2026 hosting the World Cup. There's a lot of lessons learned from our experience, and we've had those conversations, John, and I'm very, very optimistic that those can actually move forward.
We were talking a bit earlier today about impact, and I often get asked, which business and human rights initiatives around the world have actually made a tangible difference in the lives of people? And the Immokalee workers example was given here in the US. I would say the Accord in Bangladesh, this is 10 years since the Rana Plaza factory collapse, and that clearly has made things better. But would you say that your work, I mean, I would say, from what we know, at least for the 30,000 workers on the site, things weren't fantastic, right? There were still fatalities, etc. But in terms of everyone's expectation years before, but a considerable amount of leverage, right? There was the blockade on Qatar, there was a well-resourced government,
COVID.
there was COVID, international attention around it that you were able to leverage to some extent. Is that not just a bit of perfect storm of factors? How do you build similar leverage around other events so that you can do what is very difficult, I think, applying international standards in that context?
It is, I guess you could say it's a perfect storm. It's either an opportunity or perhaps even challenging in many ways. But I think ultimately, look, companies, organizations want to be associated with the brand. This is fundamental. And I think the World Cup is a big brand. Big mega events have that opportunity. And I think using that, and multinationals, I mean, we've had conversation with multinationals about using their brand to put leverage on companies to do the right thing to improve the working conditions. But it has to be used, right? I mean, ultimately, you can't shy away from it. We certainly didn't. I think we've recognized when we were told that the recruitment fees is a challenge you don't want to take on. We didn't just stand still, right? And this is just one of many. I mean, to think of $22.5 million being put back in the pockets of workers, John, this is not insignificant. I mean, Apple, as far as I'm aware, is the only other company in the world over probably a 15-year period, much longer than us, reimbursed $37 million plus dollars. So, and if you talk to Rosie and Impact, who've actually been helpful in validating the work that we've done, because we needed it. We wanted to make sure that our work not only received the credibility it deserved, but we wanted others to learn from it. Not just simply Qatar as a whole, but also multinationals around the world.
But do you, I mean, we're just about at time now, but the issue of repayment, is it the solution? Is it the fundamental solution to what's going wrong here? Or are you just feeding the beast, accepting the...
Money back in the pockets of workers means something.
Right.
Means something for them and their families, and you can't shy away from it. I think prevention is definitely absolutely the sort of, the ideal situation is to prevent this outbreak from the beginning before happening. And I'll tell you something, John, we have some success stories, and it's often we talk about the dire stories and the sad stories, but there's been some positive stories that are worth highlighting, because also positive breeds more positive. I mean, I think this is the key here. I mean, you can criticize till you go blue in the face, but sometimes it's really good to reflect and acknowledge when good work is being done. It only feeds better work, and it creates a level of competition. We're seeing it now in the region, by the way, and I think this is an important point. But I think you look at, for example, I'll give you an example, and there's quite a few. The hotel industry in of itself is an example of how they've improved their recruitment, by the way, process by eliminating the middleman and going directly hiring. But we've seen it also in major transportation. Morrison, for instance, which is a transportation company in Qatar. They had to ramp up to about 4,000 plus workers. They came to us, asked for advice on how to do it right from the beginning. We advised them, we gave them the standards, we gave them the tools. We even embedded people that were trained per our standards within the Muwasalat sort of infrastructure. And they had drives in the sending countries, eliminating the middleman to hire directly. So we can avoid this issue of dealing with unlicensed brokers, exorbitant fees being paid. And this is just one of several stories. So I think, definitely, again, prevention is key, but remediation is an obligation on all of us if we can step in and try to right the wrong.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you so much for joining us today. A round of applause, please.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Difficult work in a difficult context, and thank you for being open with us today. It's for those of us here in the room, we have a reception which is immediately outside. Do circulate, have a drink, but do stick around, because in half an hour we have a guest speaker who will be speaking to us briefly. And tomorrow, 9 o'clock start, allow time to get through security, and we start with an exciting focus on shipping and logistics. But thanks again for a brilliant day, everybody. And thanks to Neil and all my colleagues for a job well done. Thank you.